Sara Branham was born in Oxford, Georgia in 1888. Her family was ahead of its time in its belief in higher education for women. Her mother and grandmother were both graduates of Wesleyan College, and both of her grandfathers taught at Wesleyan.
Well, interestingly, Wesleyan was founded in 1836, and Sara Branham was the third generation of her family to attend Wesleyan. Her grandmother was in the very first graduating class, 1840. Then her mother attended Wesleyan as well, and then she came to Wesleyan. She had several brothers who were very well educated, so education was obviously very important to her family.
A young Sara graduated from Wesleyan in 1907. But there was very little for her to do with a college diploma in those days, except go into public school teaching.
One thing I think that's interesting is when she went to Wesleyan, she majored in biological sciences, but with the intention of teaching. And what got her out to the University of Colorado was teaching, but then she was able to make the transition into actual research and was able to leave the classroom.
And she had 2 bachelor's degrees. So she got one from Wesleyan, and then she went on and got one from University of Colorado. And then she went on and got a master's, PhD, and MD from the University of Chicago. So she was very well educated.
With the pressure for manpower in World War I, Sara was enlisted to teach bacteriology at the University of Colorado Medical School. Over the next 10 years, she earned her PhD at the University of Chicago and a faculty position there, and would go on to earn her medical degree.
And the reason that she was able to get a job there at the time was because World War I was going on, and men were not there. They were all fighting. And so the positions that would normally have been filled by men were being opened up to women like Sara. But she took advantage of that opportunity, and then the same thing happened when she was at NIH and began to work on the meningitis cure.
By the time World War I ended, she was so ingrained in the study of bacteriology, there was no getting out. So even once the men had returned, her position was secure and her passion was formed, and she was definitely going to go forward in pursuit of that study. And her contributions were tremendous.
A very impressive lady, somebody who appears to have been a pioneer in microbiology. And as you can see, we're in a modern microbiology laboratory today. What impressed me so much about Sara's work was the era in which she became a noted microbiologist was not an era that was very conducive to women succeeding.
When Sara was 40 years old, she was appointed to the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. This appointment directed the rest of her life.
She joined the NIH in 1927, where she stayed for another 25, 30 years. One of the main diseases that was really considered almost incurable was Neisseria meningitis. It's a meningococcus.
It was here that Sara's greatest single accomplishment was made, a successful treatment for the dreaded spinal meningitis.
Well, I think the biggest thing was Neisseria. To use sulfanilamide in an epidemic was hitting this country, and for her to come up with the idea of using this sulfa drug, which had only been out a few years in Europe, and to change the serum, but she improved upon it. So that combination of her serum and the use of the drug sulfanilamide saved countless lives.
For Sara Branham's end of things, in the 20s and 30s, that was just around the discovery of antibiotics. And now, here we are almost 100 years later, and we're working on resistance to all of these antibiotics, but they still can be effective. But that's sort of where science has led us.
Sara received numerous awards. She represented the United States at the first 2 international conferences on microbiology in the 1930s. Wesleyan College awarded her its first Distinguished Service Award in 1950, and similar honors came from the University of Chicago and the University of Colorado. In 1959, the American Women's Medical Association named Sara Woman of the Year.
She is the grand lady of microbiology. She was born in Georgia. She came back to Georgia very often to teach and encourage both women and men to get into the field of microbiology, and is buried in Georgia as well.
One of the things I most admire about Sara Branham Matthews is the way she exhibits to all of us what a sense of calling means and how one goes about developing that sense of calling, because it starts with what one loves, which clearly for her was biology and research, particularly in teaching. But that's just the beginning.
Sara Branham kept her maiden name professionally, but in private life she was married to Philip S. Matthews. She died in 1962 and is buried in Oxford. Her life and work are a monument to the achievement of women in medicine and public health.
By definition, one who is in the research profession has a lot of failures, and I'm sure she did too, but she learned from those failures and kept using the same methodology and improving it and getting better, and that led her to many more successes for which she is well known. To me, that's the definition of what a calling is all about, and she lived hers to the fullest. She's a great example for all of us.
Now there is an organism called Brahmanmelia cataralis. It's an organism in the upper airway. It's related to Neisseria. They've changed the name recently to Moxalia cataralis.
Her contributions to the field are enormous, and I'm certain the people that she inspired along the way, and not just women, but people had to have seen that she had the knowledge and the confidence and the persistence to stick with this research, follow through, and come up with answers to real problems that were plaguing the United States during those times.
The first ceremony for Georgia Women of Achievement was in 1992. There was a call for nominations, and probably 25 or 30 nominations were received. And the Board of Selections at the time decided that they were going to approve 5. Sara Branham Matthews was one of the original 5 inductees into Georgia Women of Achievement, which in and of itself speaks volumes about her importance as a public figure and as a woman of science in the state of Georgia.
I mean, coming up with the treatment for a fatal disease in the 1930s, yeah, I think that's very significant.